Once again, we are back with more history, but this time with extra history. That's right, this time we're gonna react to the end of the samurai. Where the samurai lost their whole privileged side of being the warriors that ruled Japan. The emperor regained power from the shogunate. How does the Western power influence so much? I already seen The Last Samurai. Great movie. Should fucking Tom Cruise. How can you not love him? Anyway, and with that, remember to check out the original video in the description below. Support their channel. They have been doing amazing history videos since God knows how long. And with that, let us begin. The end of the samurai. Japanese history. This is the entire 45-minute video.
July 8th, 1853. 4 Western ships sail into the bay, headed for the capital of the Tokugawa shogunate, ignoring warnings that this port is...
This is HD.
is close to foreign ships. They anchor, turned their heavy guns toward a coastal trading town, and open fire. But they're blanks. Intended, they claim, to celebrate the 4th of July.
Yeah, of course.
But the intention of this fleet and its leader, Commodore Matthew Perry, is not so benign.
I remember, like, during COVID, there was like a joke going around, like, Japan is gonna stop trading with the rest of the world, and everyone's like, Matthew Perry is gonna rise from his grave.
As a letter from U.S. President Millard Fillmore requesting that Japan open its ports to trade. But Perry also sends his own letter along with the gift of a white flag. He says that if the shogunate refuses the request, it will lead to war. A war that Japan will certainly lose, and in such case, they should use the white flag to indicate surrender. The shogunate will accept Perry's terms, and in doing so, bring the era of the samurai
the ego,
to a bloody
the
end.
confidence, the
Before
badassery.
we continue, if you would like to mark this era in time in a far less bloody fashion, then you have got to check out our new Extra History 2026 calendar live on Kickstarter right now. This thing is gorgeous, but more on this after the episode.
Oh, okay. The black ships. I always thought it was one ship for the longest time.
8 months after Perry's arrival, and under the threat of military action, the Japanese government caved. The resulting treaty gave the U.S. trading rights in 2 Japanese ports, an American consulate in Japan, the right for American ships to purchase coal, and ensured good treatment of shipwrecked American whalers. And in doing so, the Tokugawa shogunate abruptly ended a policy of isolation that had kept it sheltered from the outside world for 220 years. That period of isolation began shortly after the shogunate's founding in the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, which you can learn about in our series on them, when the Tokugawa closed itself off to minimize destabilizing factors. The first move was to avoid military campaigns abroad unless victory was absolutely assured, a policy inspired by Shogun Toyotomi Hideyoshi's disastrous invasion of Korea. And clever diplomacy between the equally insular kingdoms of China and Korea ensured that the 3 powers would stay out of each other's way. Then second, they banned and brutally repressed Christianity, which Hideyoshi believed undermined the traditional structures of Confucian loyalty. And
what was it? What was that? Was it Martyrs? No, it wasn't Martyrs. I believe there was that one movie about like 2 missionaries stuck in Japan after this lockdown basically happened. I think it was called like Silence. Yeah, I believe that was the one movie. That's like, oh god. What's that? What's the actor for Taken? Guy. God, I can't believe I forgot his name. But he's in it too. Damn it, I forgot his name. This is embarrassing.
Spanish and Portuguese from entry in hopes of stopping Catholic missionaries. Dutch, Chinese, and for a time, English ships were allowed to trade in a limited capacity using an offshore island, but Japan essentially sealed itself off. Few Japanese were allowed to travel outside for diplomatic missions, and those who did were not allowed back. Foreign books were banned. At first, this insular policy upheld the shogunate's stability. No major losses in overseas wars, no chance for the Tokugawa's rivals to make foreign allies, and no disruptive revolutionary ideas challenging the shogun's strict caste system.
For now.
In fact, it created one of the most peaceful periods in Japanese history. But it also came at a cost. Without access to, or knowledge about, the outside world, technological development slowed to a crawl. Now, while that wasn't a problem in an era where Japan's rivals were China and Korea, the shock of Britain defeating China in the First Opium War showed that Japan was woefully unprepared to counter foreign invasion. Added to that, the shogunate's enforced caste system.
Because a lot of people say at the time, China is like a paper tiger. But at the same time, that is still like a million men, with a million armed men, getting their ass handed to them by like a few thousand, 10,000 really. And that just shows like how much technology can really influence the turn of battle. Also, China is seen as like the big bad of all of Asia. If they get their ass handed to them, what does the rest of the little guys stand a chance?
Where a family's rank was permanently fixed, came under strain. At the top of the pyramid were the emperor and court, whose power was only ceremonial. Then it was the military leader, the shogun, though technically ranking below the emperor, who actually ruled with his daimyo or lords, followed by the warriors of the samurai beneath. Next came the farmers and artisans, and at the very bottom was the merchants. But here was a problem. The samurai were a class defined by war. It was how they made their money, and their whole purpose was to obediently fight the shogun's enemies.
Exactly.
And Japan had largely been at peace for 2 centuries, so you could start seeing the writing on the wall.
They also do other things too, but that is their main thing. But they also do other things like upkeeping the palace. They have to know logistic, calligraphy, other cultural stuff, poetry, like other things that you expect nobility to do. But of course, if fighting is their main thing, and Japan was a very martial society at the time, they would focus on that, and they would struggle to switch from that to doing calligraphy and poetry and all that stuff. Not mentioning math, logistics, stewardship. Ugh.
In that time, most samurai ended up turning into bureaucrats and estate managers for their daimyo. They still kept warrior codes and trained in swordsmanship, but that was largely ceremonial. Others let go when their lords cut their militaries, took to the roads as masterless samurai called ronin. Some of them little better than bandits. And rendered unnecessary and impoverished by peace, the samurai class increasingly fell into debt. But you know who didn't? The merchants.
Exactly.
Yeah, those lowly merchants at the bottom of the pyramid kept gaining financial power from even the limited foreign trade, essentially upending Tokugawa society. They became a new middle class, living increasingly urban and decadent lives in the cities.
Resident in the shogunate capital and expensive drove many samurai. Ooh.
Engaging in an entertainment and artistic culture called the floating world, which encompassed red light districts with theaters, brothels, tea houses, baths, and geishas. And new forms of art like kabuki, puppet theater, painting, live comedy, and political satire flourished within these districts. It was also a world where there was no recognition of rank. In these districts, a rich merchant got better service than a poor samurai. So even before Perry's arrival, the discontent was rife among the samurai, especially among the historical enemies of the Tokugawa in the south. So when these shogunate officials signed a treaty with Perry, it exposed
this makes me want to play Shogun 2 again.
Anti-foreign daimyo rallied against the government for their shameful surrender, rather than fighting the Americans with honor. Yet as internal discontent reared its head, the shogunate was more concerned with external threats. After the signing, Perry had presented the shogunate with official gifts of rifles, Colt revolvers, a sample telegraph system, and a waist-high model locomotive. Technologies that stunned the Japanese officials. If they were ever to stand up to these Western barbarians, they needed to modernize fast. The shogunate quickly entered negotiations to buy steamships,
that would make
rifles,
sense.
and
They would
modern cannons. Plus, they sent
illegally smuggle foreign things in. Like, that reminds me of the really good Netflix show, Blue Eye Samurai. Y'all should watch it. So good. Season 2 coming soon, probably.
Officials overseas to scout for new technologies.
Don't
but they weren't the only ones arming up. Daimyo that opposed the treaty began purchasing weapons as well, preparing for conflict with the shogun. Discontent grew. Foreign trade crashed the currency and caused massive gold and silver outflow. Plus, 3 powerful earthquakes rocked the country within 2 years, one striking the shogun's capital of Edo, and another triggering a tsunami that hit one of the new American ports. Even the gods seemed disquieted. And in the next 5 years, even more Western treaties were foisted on Japan, with many of the negotiations overseen by Chief Minister Ii Naosuke. Foreigners were now exempt from Japanese law, and Christianity would be tolerated. an opposition party coalesced, centered around the slogan, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians."
Ooh.
It was a party that was particularly strong in the eastern province of Mito, and in the south among the longtime Tokugawa enemies of Setsuma and Shoshu. Increasingly, they began to talk about overthrowing the shogunate and replacing it with a government centered around the currently ceremonial emperor. Among the southern nobles were three
look
men
at them.
that would play a key
Look at them.
role in
In
events
their
to come,
fancy Western
becoming
clothes.
known as the Three Great Nobles, but we'll meet them later.
Okay.
The emperor was, after all, still technically the head of government, and he was privately furious about the unequal treaties. For the anti-foreign and pro-imperial parties, it was an opportunity to finally do away with the Tokugawa and rally behind the emperor instead. It was a particularly convenient time for a coup, since there was also a succession crisis in the shogunate. Because you see, during the
right.
negotiations with Perry,
I
the
forgot it.
shogun had died, leaving
forgot
the
about that.
position of shogun to his sickly son, who only lived 5 years.
Ugh,
Then when
rough
he
guy.
in turn died, multiple factions tried to back their favorite candidate. One faction backed Tokugawa Yoshinobu, who would be key to later events, but Ienaosuke managed to steer Tokugawa Iemoche to the position, despite the fact that he was only 12, and the
Oof.
other candidates were adults.
Hey. Child king means easily influenced, and they leave all the work up to the adults. In this case, the nobility around them.
Ienaosuke became regent for the young shogun, assuming most of the official powers. And he immediately used his new influence to purge court of opposing factions, putting Yoshinobu and his supporters under house arrest, banishing the anti-foreign party from court,
least he's
and
alive.
beheading their two most prominent
Never mind.
leaders for plotting against the government. It was the start of what would be an increasing cycle of political violence. Edo Castle, March
I spoke too
24th,
soon.
1860. A festival day. Ienaosuke is needed at the castle for meetings. His train of attendants, 60 guards and palanquin bearers, are all on the lookout. There have been threats. Suddenly, there's a shot from a Colt revolver. Shouts. Sunlight on blades. A group of Ronin from Mito crash into the front of the guards.
How
The
many?
attendants drop E's palanquin and surge forward to
Something indicated and was fatally wounded or even killed by bullet. It was unconscious. when
protect their
captured.
daimyo. They don't see the man coming from the side, approaching the now unguarded sedan chair. It's a samurai from Satsuma. He drags the minister out of the chair
Oof.
and decapitates him right there on the road. As the guards turn stunned, they see the samurai holding their master's head aloft in triumph. One guard cuts the assassin as he tries to flee, and then mortally wounded, the assassin falls on his sword rather than be captured. There is no going back. From here, the violence will only
His
worsen,
armor that his
and the
supporter tried to
streets
make it
of
look like he
Kyoto
died fighting
will
supposedly
flow
sued his
red
head.
with blood.
Ooh. They sewed his head back on. That's fucking hardcore.
Ikadaya in Kyoto, July 8th, 1864. Men creep toward the glowing windows of the boarding house. They can see
another
shadows
assassination.
of those talking inside. They wear the blue robes of the Shinsengumi, the feared police force of the shogun.
Opening scene
Expert
of
swordsmen.
Yakuza
They've been
Ishin.
tasked with suppressing the political violence that's tearing up the lantern-lit streets of the imperial city. Inside are the men of Choshu, and they plan to set fire to Kyoto, then use the confusion to attack rivals and get custody of the emperor. Suddenly, the Shinsengumi rush the building.
God,
Swords
they're
clash,
so-
but they're outnumbered.
I know like historically they weren't that big of a deal, but I always loved them. They were so badass, especially after anime like Gintama. I really love their aesthetic. You seen that one picture of like one of the guy who just like sitting on a chair in like a Western outfit, but with like a katana to the side, and he's like fucking man-spreading it. I love that one picture.
20 of them against 30 Choshu plotters. Katanas swipe and strike, battles rage up and down the stairs. Swordsmen smash through paper walls. The fighting spills out of the inn and onto a nearby bridge. But the Shinsengumi hold their ground, as reinforcements surround the plotters within the besieged inn. 2 hours later, the Shinsengumi have killed 8 Choshu men and arrested 23 more.
Jesus.
The plot is foiled, but Kyoto will still burn. 4 years after the assassination of Ienaosuke, Japanese politics were as divided as ever. Enemies of the shogunate increasingly coalesced into the Sonojoi faction, the anti-foreign pro-imperial party, which marched under the motto, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians," that was feeding off of discontent with the government's foreign relations. All the while, Europe had followed the United States, enforcing unequal treaties on Japan, not only allowing their citizens to be
the American
there, but
pulled
also
out
be
because they
immune
got
to
distracted.
Japanese
That's
law.
funny.
It was a tinderbox. and it got set alight in 1860 when a British merchant named Charles Richardson got impatient on a major road and tried to force his way through a column of passing.
Before forcing his way through a samurai procession, reportedly said, "I have lived 7 years in China. I know how to deal with these people."
Satsuma samurai. The
Oh,
samurai,
no.
who had the right to kill any commoner that disrespected them, cut Richardson down. Britain argued that Richardson was murdered and demanded the Satsuma pay a £100,000 indemnity as a kind of restitution. But when the Satsuma refused to pay or execute those responsible, Britain threatened a military response, to which the shogunate, fearing the British would bombard Edo, then paid the indemnity. However, the Satsuma still refused to turn over Richardson's killers. The standoff was perfectly calculated to inflame the Sono-joi, demonstrating that foreigners felt they could behave any way they wanted without consequence, backed up by their country's gunboats. And the next year, Emperor Komei himself joined the political fray. For centuries, the emperors of Japan had been apolitical figures, largely ceremonial. But Komei saw an opportunity to subvert the shogunate that
Yes.
effectively held him
Yes,
as a prisoner
he-
and seize
God
political
know how
power
long
himself.
the fucking
So in
emperor has been waiting for
1863,
this.
when he issued an order to expel barbarians, giving all foreigners 2 months to leave Japan, his intentions were immediately clear. The emperor had aligned himself against the foreign policy of the shogun, and with those seeking a restoration of imperial power. He'd effectively declared that restorationists, not the shogun, were the ones representing his interests. Following the emperor's order, the daimyo of the Choshu clan began firing on foreign ships in the Shimonoseki Strait, even using the 3 American-built steamships
Oh.
he'd purchased to battle the USS
Yeah.
Wyoming, which originally had tried to force the port open. A month later, British warships sent to demand that
Ooh,
Satsuma hand over
okay.
Richardson's killers
Coming back
bombarded
with
the Satsuma-held
Yep.
city of Kagoshima, the city's antiquated shore batteries holding out a
Few Japanese were killed during the bombardment of Kagoshima, since the population had been evacuated. In fact, the British sustained more casualties, including their commanders. Huh. Okay, that's good.
until the British ship ran out of ammunition. As it sailed off, the samurai of Satsuma stood in the knee-deep water, waving their swords. The next year, a multinational fleet of British, Dutch, French, and a single American ship,
single
all they could
American
spare
ship.
due to the Civil War,
Okay,
attacked
that's fair.
Shimonoseki again. These punitive expeditions only deepened anti-foreign sentiment and the divide between the supporters of the emperor and those of the shogun. Then the plots began. Because if the restorationist faction could get their hands on the emperor, they could declare the Tokugawa shogunate illegitimate and bring it down. Kyoto filled with plotters
'Cause
of
the
many
emperor
stripes,
can't
from
write out-
moderate to
can't
radical.
write out say
There were
that.
staunch traditionalists, like the Satsuma samurai Saigo Takamori, who believed in imperial
It's the guy from the movie.
restoration, but also military modernization as a survival tactic. Then there was Sakuma Shosen, a Renaissance man who'd read Western books and done experiments with electricity, batteries, and even built a working telegraph before Perry had even arrived. He wanted to open Japan fully to trade, with radical modernization under the slogan, Japanese spirit, Western technique. And then there was
That's gonna be
Sakamoto
hard to
Ryoma,
do,
a
'cause-
samurai who hoped that after
mean-
reinstalling the emperor, a new government would abolish feudalism and the caste system. He imagined a future where Japan was a democracy of the American or British style, with equality for all men and a
that's a
gradual
very-
industrialization
that's a very
and
hard push.
modernization process
That's
that
a
also
very hard
respected
push,
tradition.
considering they're
And
still
you could
very
always
feudal.
tell who Ryoma was. He wore samurai robes and swords, but Western shoes. Kyoto became a hotbed of political violence.
That is very symbolic if you think about it.
Samurai killed shogunate officials or political opponents. Rival clans skirmished along the canals and brawled through tea houses and inns. Even the British ambassador was attacked. And Sakuma Shosen, the pro-science samurai who advocated opening the country to trade, was ambushed and murdered in broad daylight.
That sounds about right.
Shogunate troops poured into the imperial palace, partially honor guards, partially prison guards, so the rebel clans couldn't rescue the emperor, and a dreaded new force, the Shinsengumi, patrolled the streets. Made up of ronin recruited from the sword schools of Edo, and originally temporary bodyguards for the shogun, the Shinsengumi were repurposed into a police force. Consummate swordsmen and fanatically loyal to the shogun, they became infamous for operating more as a political gang. They would put up signs targeting restorationists and then ambush said targets when they came to take the messages down.
Also, they were apparently very good at political debates. But they usually just debate amongst each other and then beat up anyone else.
And actually, their first leader became so known for his erratic outbursts of violence that the Shinsengumi themselves assassinated him.
Oof,
But they proved their worth, smashing anti-shogunate plots
kinda
like
rough.
the Ikadaya incident.
That's so rough.
Though less than 300 in number, their simple banners and headbands, marked with the character for sincerity, became the face of shogunate rule in Kyoto. 1 month after the fight at the Ikadaya Inn, the streets of Kyoto were afire once more. A force of 3,000 samurai, 1,400 from Choshu, and 1,600 ronin attacked a gate of the imperial palace. And in the confused fighting, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, who had nearly been declared shogun during the last succession crisis, led a patchwork of clans against the rebels. It was an odd mix. The Satsuma samurai, led by Saigo Takamori, took the side of the shogunate alongside the
Now it's a full-on
Shinsengumi.
civil
Despite
war.
Saigo's restorationist feelings, he was not yet ready to rebel. It was a disaster for the Choshu forces. Outnumbered more than 10 to 1, and leaving 400 bodies at the gate, they set part of the palace alight in an attempt to escape, but burned down part of Kyoto in the process. And that's when the shogunate really started cracking down on dissent. They hastily organized an expedition to punish Choshu, but when the expedition arrived, there was no war to fight. Because Saigo Takamori, among the expedition's commanders, persuaded the Choshu samurai, rather than battle, to simply hand over the plot's leaders. The shogun was, to be honest, relieved, because a conflict might provoke a larger war, and currently, he had the upper hand. Except he didn't, because while the Choshu clans were Saigo Takamori's traditional rivals, he had realized that if he ever hoped to overthrow the shogun, the southern domains of Satsuma and Choshu would have to form an anti-Tokugawa bloc. Sneaky, sneaky. But to pursue this
fucking classic samurai treachery. The enemy of your enemy is my friend. Wait, is that how the saying goes? I think that's how the saying goes.
easy alliance, they would need a go-between, a third party that belonged to neither clan and could broker a deal, a samurai everyone respected. And he knew just the guy, Sakamoto Ryoma. Like many restorationists, he'd fled to Satsuma. And after nearly 2 years of work and a coup that brought an extremist restorationist faction to power in Choshu, he'd managed to forge an alliance. And the forging didn't stop there. Choshu had been long interested in building a navy of Western ships, but now they expanded to modern rifles and infantry as well. Satsuma, impressed with British firepower after the bombardment of
so that's why they get such good ship bonus in the game.
Kagoshima, paid part of the indemnity for Richardson and agreed to pay the rest by buying steam-powered warships. And both provinces also hired members of the European military to train their new troops.
Generally, when hiring military, Daimyo hired French army officer in the British. Huh. Oh, okay, so that's why they're like the foreign mercenaries. Well, the foreign advisors you can actually hire in the game. Huh. And what? No Americans?
And naval officers.
Not at least
no one
yet.
knew it, but these two rebels.
Okay. I suppose in the game they needed the American as like a middleman to be like for balancing reason. Makes sense.
Provinces were creating what would become the Imperial Japanese Navy. Meanwhile, in Edo, the shogunate military was doing the same, buying French ships and former Confederate steamers, organizing another Choshu expedition to smash these rebel provinces. But when the shogunate troops reached Choshu, they found something they didn't expect. A well-drilled modern army, rather than the partially modernized shogunate force. The expedition fell apart in disaster, and the shogunate's troops were forced to retreat. And then, the shogun died, followed by the emperor. And two new young men, who would both prove pivotal figures, came to the scene. Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the man who'd led the shogunate forces during the attack on the palace gate, became the new shogun. And then 6 months later, a new emperor ascended, and as was tradition, took a new name,
Emperor
Meiji. And he believed in the restoration, even if it meant a war.
So Emperor Meiji is just like the name, the historical name.
Kyoto, December 10th, 1867.
The name he's remembered by.
Sakamoto Ryoma sits in an anonymous inn, discussing how things will soon change. A month before, the shogun Yoshinobu had accepted an 8-point proposal that handed political power to the emperor. Ryoma had written that proposal, yet the transition is not complete, and his friends say there's still danger. The year before,
definitely.
Ryoma had escaped assassination in a house much like this one, battling his way out and firing.
Was warned of the assassin by his future wife Narasaki Ryo, who leapt out of the bathtub and ran to his room partially naked to alert him. Goaded. No wonder he put a ring on that woman.
point blank
I
on
would
the
if she did
attackers
that.
with a
If
Smith
my
&
woman
Wesson
saved my
revolver.
ass like that.
Suddenly, a heavy thump is heard from downstairs.
Grab your sword.
His bodyguards, two sumo wrestlers, must be sparring again. He yells for them to knock it off. But moments later, the sliding door opens, revealing men with swords, the Shogun's men. As Ryoma lunges for his katana, someone knocks over the room's lantern. And in the sudden darkness, the blades of assassins fall on Sakamoto Ryoma.
Damn.
On November 9th, 1867, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu, after years of intrigue and violence, finally bowed to political reality. The restorationist Triple Alliance of Choshu, Satsuma, and Tosa provinces had a modern army to match his, and civil war was on the horizon. He could fight, or he could step down and let the Tokugawa clan retain some role in government. So he accepted the 8-point plan written by the young radical Sakamoto Ryoma, one that amounted to the total reshaping of Japan's political system. The first point called for Yoshinobu to resign as shogun, giving full political power to the imperial court. There would also now be a 2-part legislative body with an upper and lower house to decide government policy based on popular opinion. It created new advisors and abolished old offices, and called for a reshaping of foreign affairs, a new legal code, an enlarged navy, an official imperial guard, and fixing the price of precious metals to the world market. Yoshinobu didn't lose all of his power, though. Exactly who would perform what function and what powers the
I mean, a lot of it's like military and economy fixes, but in the government itself, having a 2-party that goes up and down, the upper house and the lower house, that just feels like, I don't know, that just feels like too big feudal senate, if that makes sense. I can see it's like a step towards democracy, but I don't know how effective it would be.
shogun would maintain was a subject of divisive debate, because the shogun's official duties were to be Japan's military leader, and Yoshinobu still had a considerable military force personally loyal to him. That included a core force of 900 modern infantry troops trained by a French military mission, and a modernized fleet with British naval advisors. He also had a power base of northern daimyo that he could rally to his cause. Indeed, many in the Restorationist camp thought Yoshinobu should be brought into the governing coalition. A peaceful transfer of power would help legitimize their new government in the eyes of foreign powers. Plus, just like many Restorationists, Yoshinobu was reform-minded and believed in modernization. Moderates thought they could work with him, but the radicals among the Restorationists, particularly Saigo Takamori, refused. They wanted the shogunate dissolved, with the Tokugawa clan stripped of their lands and barred from government. It was a stalemate. And then the Restorationists got tired of waiting. On January 3rd, 1868, Satsuma and Choshu troops marched on the imperial palace in Kyoto and got the emperor's
The Tokugawa at this time is still too powerful an influence to get rid of completely. Then they will of course start another civil war. Everything would collapse, and worst case scenario, the country fall apart and even weakens even more.
Guards, in reality his shogunate jailers, to stand down. Now freed to act as he wished, the 15-year-old emperor declared the restoration of imperial rule and beginning of a new era, that of Meiji, meaning enlightened rule. 2 weeks later, in the shogunate capital of Edo, Yoshinobu officially rejected the restorationist terms, which now included the surrender of all his lands. Restorationist partisans burned Yoshinobu's personal palace in Kyoto down for refusing to submit, and then he responded by raising the Edo residence of the Satsuma leader Saigo Takamori. Then Yoshinobu sailed out of Osaka Castle with his modernized force, vassal troops, and Shinsengumi. And he swore to liberate Emperor Meiji from rebel control. Because despite everything that had happened, to appear legitimate, Yoshinobu still had to claim that he was acting...
Okay, the big part of that is to, bring up more legitimacy onto his side. I say he's just liberating the emperor
in the emperor's best interest. The Boshin War had begun. January 27th, 1868, a road south of Kyoto.
Now
the shogunate.
Now it is officially begun, because now there's like clear two sides to this: the emperor and the shogunate. But they say the shogun. Yeah, no, the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate. And, well, oh man. It's officially where the game begins too, if I remember correctly.
Advanced guard reaches a bridge, seeing a Satsuma banner and restorationist troops dug in. But their commander doesn't expect a battle. Shogunate forces number 15,000, and here there are only 5,000 restorationist defenders.
Only 5,000.
He puts his feudal vassal troops with pikes in the front, and the modernized infantry behind them haven't even loaded their rifles. Then he sends a messenger to the Satsuma, saying they carry a letter to the emperor and asking for passage. The Satsuma then deny them passage and open fire. And it's here that the firepower of the restorationist force becomes apparent. The Shogunate force has 2 modernized infantry battalions. True, but the Satsuma have invested in artillery.
Ooh.
A shell from a breech-loading Armstrong gun explodes near the commander, throwing him from his horse. Then more shells fall. There's the crack of rifles throwing conical...
Semi-modernized Japanese troops at this period often had a mix of different rifles, some cutting edge, the other a decade or two out.
Bullets the size of a thumb, and then starting slow but getting faster. The lethal drumbeat of a Gatling gun. Further south, on a different road, the second Shogunate column is approaching another bridge. Here too, the outnumbered restorationists are dug in, and at the sound of shooting in the distance, their guns open up as well. Shinsengumi and vassal troops charge into the smoke-wreathed bridge, into withering fire. The huge Shogunate army can't take the bridges, but they also don't flee. Then, on the second day, a new battle standard appears on the restorationist lines, an imperial brocade banner, a standard that can only be carried when the military has the express permission of the emperor and his personal sanction. Along with it comes a directive from the emperor that Yoshinobu and any who fight with him are traitors. The emperor had, with all of the powers of the state, backed the restorationists. And now, this is no longer a rebel force, it's the Imperial Japanese Army.
Officially.
This news does what the advanced guns could not. It breaks the shogun's larger force. Men fall back, unwilling to fire on the imperial banner. Units defect, and previously shogun-aligned daimyo lock their castle gates to the retreating army.
Let me
Granted,
in!
Shogunate forces had won a minor naval victory the same day, but it was cold comfort. Yoshinobu, shaken by the dramatic political turn, boarded a ship and fled to Edo. But the now imperial forces chased him. Saigo Takamori also caught the head of the Shinsengumi in an ambush outside the shogunate capital, annihilating his force and executing him, incorrectly, for the murder of Sakamoto Ryoma. Then, the now imperial troops surrounded Edo and took it, street by street, over the next 2 months. Yoshinobu found his options running out. In fact, his one remaining point of leverage, that foreign governments still recognize the shogunate as Japan's legitimate government, also vanished, as imperial diplomats had convinced the Western nations to remain neutral and back whoever won. Then, sometime in June, Yoshinobu,
I mean, if I was a Western power, looking into this mess, I would do the same.
Conditionally surrendered to Saigo Takamori's forces and voluntarily went into house arrest at a local temple. But his admiral slipped away with the fleet, taking the most die-hard shogunate holdouts and a few French military advisors to the northern island of Hokkaido. There, they declared an American-style republic.
Yeah, so republic was the phantom, though only samurai could vote in less than 6 months. Yeah, no, that government fell apart so quickly. If you read about it, you realize that it was a mess from the start. It felt like a cult. It felt like a cult that went nowhere.
And geared up for the final confrontation, which is when the imperial forces wheeled out their most powerful weapon, pageantry. They arranged a massive imperial caravan to Edo at huge expense, moving the emperor out of Kyoto for the first time in his life and installing him in the shogun's former castle. There, the emperor declared that the city would be renamed to fit its new function in the post-shogunate world. It would be the eastern capital, Tokyo. It was an enormous propaganda coup, the first time ordinary people got to see the emperor and feel his presence. Though there were still some castles to besiege and diehards to clear out, the more public the emperor became, the more defections occurred, the more resistance melted, except in Hokkaido. Miyako Bay, Hokkaido, May 6, 1869. The Shinsengumi force and their French advisor crouch on the deck of the paddle steamer, ready for their desperate operation. They're flying a U.S. flag, masquerading as a foreign ship, and they're approaching the Imperial fleet, the one sent to crush them. At its head, the brand new ironclad Kotetsu, with armor far too thick for them to penetrate. From the outside, at least. They raise the flag of the Republic, paddle wheels churning them directly for the Kotetsu. Their guns open up at the last moment as they brace. The bow of their ship crunches into the ironclad, and a boarding party of the Shinsengumi goes over the other side. They plan to destroy or capture the Kotetsu from the inside in order to have a fighting chance in the battles ahead. But the drop to the enemy deck is steep. They can't all jump at once. And as they clamber down, one at a time, the crew of the Kotetsu shakes off the surprise of the ramming attack and heads to battle stations. The Shinsengumi surge forward with their swords and pistols as the fire of the Kotetsu's deck-mounted Gatling gun
Who would win, Cuffing Baby or Atomic Bomb?
chops into them. They lose their commander. The French advisor takes 2 hits, and the boarding party breaks off the attack. The last chance of survival gone. The next day, Imperial forces, led by the Kotetsu, will destroy the Republic fleet and defeat their forces on land. The shogunate's last bastion has fallen, the Meiji restoration complete. And with the Emperor finally winning his throne, there's only one question left. When his closest samurai turn against him, can he hold on to it?
The Imperial Army.
Another inn, Kyoto, October 9th, 1869. Vice Minister of War Amura Masujiro runs down the stairs, pursued by men with swords. He bleeds from multiple wounds, including a deep one on his leg, and 2 of his friends lay dead upstairs. Omura is the man who won the Boshin War, and it was he who modernized the Choshu forces using Napoleonic tactics and peasant conscripts to topple the shogun. Now he's pushing for the same reforms on the Imperial Army, but that would end the samurai as a warrior class, stripping them of their swords. The very swords they're chasing him with. He gets out the back door, but can hear his pursuers gaining on him. Desperate, he climbs into a bathtub, watching as his blood clouds the murky water. He puts his head underneath, and as he holds his breath for what feels like an eternity, his assassins storm past unknowingly and continue their search into the night. The Boshin War may have been over, with the shogunate toppled and the Meiji Emperor restored, but the political violence that had rocked Japan was by no means finished. And given the amount of blood spilled and bitter political divides, you might think that all began with a wave of emperor-ordered executions. But it didn't. In fact, no one was executed at all.
What?
The Tokugawa lands were seized and made part of the state, and leaders of the shogunate force were arrested and held under home confinement for a few years. But by 1872, all were pardoned, and most back working for the government. Even Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the last shogun, was sent to a comfortable retirement in his domain. It was a savvy political move. The idea was to unite the country by, essentially, taking everyone at their word that they had been fighting for what they thought was the good of the emperor. The argument went that everyone had acted honorably, and it was over now. In fact, victorious Imperials even celebrated the heroism of shogunate troops. For example, a group of samurai known as the White Tigers who committed seppuku when they believed their castle had fallen, praising them as examples of military valor. They even installed the spirits of all of
It's very honorable, but at the same time, the samurais are known to be, dishonorable snakes, treachery, betrayal, politics. I won't put past them to not uphold their words. The shrine would later expand to become a shrine of all Japanese who are dead. It's the name honorable criminal make a country first. Ooh.
The war dead in a common shrine. But just because there was little official punishment didn't mean nothing would change. In fact, everything would change. During the Boshin War, the emperor and his court had issued a decree known as the Charter Oath. This 5-point plan laid out the government's aims during the new Meiji era, which did involve seismic change, though was also worded vaguely enough to be flexible. The 5 points were: 1. Deliberative assemblies with decisions made by public discussion.
Fair
2.
enough.
All classes would be united in carrying out state policy. 3.
Okay.
Common people were allowed to pursue their own calling. 4. Evil customs of the past would be discontinued.
That's
And
very
5.
vague.
Knowledge should be sought out throughout the world and used to strengthen imperial rule.
Okay,
And it
that's
was
fair.
that 5th one that was really interesting, because it was essentially an official abandonment
Armies were banned for not restoration. Gained them like recognition from Western power during the Boshin
of
War.
Son of Joy. Even though the movement had brought the emperor to power, this new Japan would embrace Western technology, along with the Western experts that must be brought in to get Japan up to speed. It was also how the Imperials got the Western nations on their side during the Boshin War. No more xenophobic attacks on foreigners would be tolerated. That got in the way of the main project, strengthening the country through economic reform, infrastructure projects, industrialization, and of course, military enhancement.
Overall,
That old
modernization.
phrase, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, was out. And in was a new rallying
Enrich the country, strengthen the military. That's doesn't have the same I don't know. It isn't as catchy, I guess.
Cry, enrich the country,
feels a bit long.
strengthen the military.
It's a bit long.
And as you can imagine,
Oh,
this was
yeah.
not all that well received among those who'd fought on the imperial side during the Boshin War, because their main objective was to shut foreign powers out of Japan and let the country develop along its own lines. But what the emperor and his reformist advisors now favored was the exact same foreign policy as the shogunate: to gradually renegotiate the unequal treaties, using its modernization as an argument that it should be treated equally with the other colonial powers. And while that might have disturbed traditionalists like the Satsuma leader Saigo Takamori, the government believed it had no other option. And that was the clear message brought back by the Iwakura mission, which between 1871 and 1873 sent diplomats on a tour through the United States and Europe, both to open negotiations and to study Western technology.
This trip was actually one of the most well-recorded trip of like Japan, Japanese samurai interacting with the Western world, and how the Western world would interact with them back at the same time, and you get perspective from both of them too, from both sides. I believe there are YouTube videos that like basically narrates that, and you should check them out. Those are very interesting, very fun to watch. I should watch them again. If you want me to react to them and watch them again, just tell me in the comments.
And government. Two of the men on that mission, Okubo Toshimichi of Satsuma and Kido Takayoshi of Choshu, would return with a grim message. Japan could not survive outside pressure without modernization, trade, and industrialization. Their artisans could not compete with the cheap Western manufactured goods, and with the unequal treaties disallowing Japan from instituting any protective tariffs or import duties, their choice was to either industrialize or have an economic crash.
Damn.
Okubo and Kido would end up with major roles in the government, known along with Saigo Takamori as the three great nobles of the Restoration, the core of a new oligarchy that controlled politics and development. And these three men and their coalition government were about to completely change what it meant to be a samurai. It was clear that the samurai system, the whole caste system of Japan in fact, was incompatible with a modern state. First of all, you can't have a centralized government when the country's divided up by hereditary lords. Kido especially argued it was a recipe for instability and dysfunction, so he proposed a solution. He convinced his Satsuma and Choshu allies to voluntarily turn their domains over to the emperor, who, in turn, reappointed them as governors. From now on, they would be government employees rather than lords. Their domains would be renamed prefectures, and their samurai paid by the government rather than the daimyo himself. Indeed, the position of daimyo ceased to exist, with all former daimyo instead given a hereditary aristocratic title that did not confer land. And samurai were similarly transitioned to a class without special privileges, many of them invited to join the bureaucracy or military. Then, 2 years later, the three nobles moved on the prefecture system again, this time offering a stipend, which would later have to be converted to government bonds due to financial problems in return for many of the holdout ex-daimyo to retire, so their former domains could be consolidated into 72 prefectures. All this was met with grumbling, even armed resistance. But then came the next, more radical step, army modernization. Now, though we talked about military modernization last episode, it would have been more accurate to discuss it in terms of weapons modernization. The Satsuma and Choshu forces had modern guns and some new tactics, but only a few units were truly modern troops, with uniforms and rank structure. Other than that, it was a free-for-all. Samurai would go into battle wearing a Western suit with 2 swords and a rifle, or a Napoleonic uniform with a katana and a revolver. Now, was it steampunk samurai?
I mean, imagine that is so Warhammer. Imagine fighting like in World War I. You see a samurai doing that.
Right, awesome. Oh, heck yeah. But efficient? Not exactly. So weapon and uniform standardization was on the agenda when Vice Minister of War Omura Masujiro began revamping the Imperial Japanese Army. But he believed in more than that. Omura was part of a faction that thought the samurai were incompatible with the equal society they dreamed of. He wanted to abolish the samurai, strip their special rights like killing peasants, ban all symbols of rank like their top knot and right to carry swords, and turn the army into a force of conscripted peasants. Not only would this take away the necessity of a warrior class, it would dissolve the private daimyo armies that could destabilize the country or stand up to the central government, and Omura was killed for it. Because while he did survive the attack we described at the beginning of the episode, the dirty bathwater he hid in ended up fatally infecting the wound in his leg. As you can imagine, many samurai were furious about these reforms, but the situation didn't fully explode until 1873, when Korea refused to recognize the Meiji emperor, leading to a debate about whether Japan should invade. But then Saigo Takamori argued
That's so ironic considering Korea is still a monarchy at the time.
that this was the perfect solution. See, the samurai were feudal lords, right? And if that wasn't working in Japan, why not just let them do that in Korea? Huh? All powerful countries have colonies after all. And the samurai, you see, could be the tip of the Japanese spear, huh? And to try to further his plan, the restless Saigo even offered to go to Korea as a diplomat and behave boorishly in order to provoke his own assassination, creating a pretext for the war. So it's not Japan's fault. Get it? It's all coming together.
Yeah.
The government said no.
Aw.
Sure, they did want to invade Korea, but they wanted to strengthen the state first. This was the final straw for Saigo. He went back to Satsuma and opened military academies for disaffected samurai, gradually cutting ties with the imperial government he helped create. This was the first step on the road to the Satsuma Rebellion and the last stand of the samurai.
Now this is where the movie really starts.
A mountain cave in Kagoshima, September 24th, 1877. Saigo Takamori and his followers are drinking sake, reciting poems about loyalty and
In
their
a
eminent
cave.
deaths. There are only a few hundred of them left. They've been on the run for months. Below, moonlight shines on Kagoshima Bay and the castle that was once his. Flashes of artillery light the encampments below, airburst shells hammering the mountainside. Soon, the imperial attack will come, and Saigo and his men will die. That's become clear. His army of noble samurai, once so revered they could legally murder the lower class if they felt disrespected, have fallen before an army of peasants with rifles. And within hours, Saigo's men will advance with their swords and die with honor in the old way. The last
old way.
samurai. For 5 years, Saigo Takamori, along
And
with Okubo,
I'm keep bringing up the movie, but at the scene at the end where they all charge to their death, such an amazing scene.
Otoshimichi and Kido Takayoshi had been
You
at
get
the
it once you
forefront
see
of
it.
reforming the Meiji state and dismantling the samurai as a class. But gradually, Saigo had grown uncomfortable with the reach of social reform. He also increasingly clashed with Okubo, who had centered more and more government powers around himself. Pressured to call a conference that would bring an agreement on forming a representative assembly, Okubo managed to create a body that was largely toothless and stacked with conservatives. His policy toward Taiwan and Korea, too aggressive for Kido, not aggressive enough for Saigo, led both men to resign from government. The three great nobles of the Restoration had divided. So, Saigo retired
that's
to his
his
lands in
politics.
Satsuma. He grew crops, hunted, wrote letters, and spent time with his grandsons. He also swore off politics. Though that in itself was a political statement, and Saigo had already become such a powerful symbol of the old ways that his silence was correctly interpreted
Played his true feeling close to his vest, as a result, he still find it hard to separate his true belief from a role he performed political and social reason. He's an honest man. He speaks his
as a
mind.
criticism of the Meiji state, which in his opinion was adopting all of the wrong things from the West. For example, he admired Western military and government institutions, but felt that the private ownership of land would incite greed and cause wealth disparity as poor farmers sold their land to the
Wait, I
rich
just realized,
during bad
is that the-
harvests.
is that-
He favored Japan's traditional feudal model of land
Okay.
division. And possibly because of this, he engaged in another pursuit besides hunting and fishing: running military academies. They were sprouting up all over Satsuma, with samurai students learning artillery, swordsmanship, and Confucian principles. These academies became a magnet for radical ex-samurai who were angry at the central government. The most hardcore dissidents who believed that samurai should keep their swords and top-knot hairstyles that were now illegal, with some even believing they should still be able to execute peasants for showing disrespect.
I feel like that
These
one,
were the
that's-
disaffected,
I should feel like
the
we should
samurai who
prioritize
failed
that
the
last one,
transition
you know?
to military or
I feel like we
bureaucracy,
should
or had
really
quickly
prioritize
squandered
that
the
last
lump
one.
of pension that the government had given out in lieu of the traditional rice stipend, or that went bankrupt because they had no skill but fighting. Other samurai formed a new political party, the Popular Rights Movement, which pushed for a more democratic model and a constitution. Sporadic samurai rebellions gripped the country. In several, disaffected samurai stormed castles, wearing antiquated armor and carrying swords just to prove a point. The modernized imperial army
Bang.
had little trouble with them. By 1876, Satsuma had effectively seceded from the rest of Japan. The governor refused to implement land reforms and taxes. Samurai openly wore their swords and top knots, and the military students were effectively a paramilitary force waiting for the order to rise. Tokyo was worried enough that it dispatched a group of spies, Tokyo police officers, to report on what was going on. But it backfired. The commander of the network got captured and, under torture, gave a dubious confession that his group had been ordered to assassinate Saigo. The prefecture boiled over, and an imperial ship was sent to try to remove ammunition from the Satsuma armory so that it couldn't be used to arm rebels. They were too late. The Satsuma rebellion had started, and Saigo came out of retirement to lead it. But he was careful about his language. Saigo wore his imperial army uniform to show that he was loyal to the emperor, but disagreed with Akubo and the rest of the court. And his stated goal was simple. They would march to Tokyo so he could ask questions of the government. And his army consisted entirely of samurai, carrying swords and seized rifles from the arsenal. Commoners were forbidden even from joining the baggage train. The samurai, with 100 rounds of ammunition each, would carry all the food they would need. His first task was to force the gates at Kumamoto Castle. There were only 3,800 imperial troops defending it, plus 600 police officers. Saigo's army outnumbered them 2-1. Plus, he knew their commander, Major General Tani Tateki, a former samurai who had fought with Saigo during the Boshin War. Saigo's army would take them easily. Or so he thought. On February 19, 1877, the imperial troops fired the first shots of the war. Saigo unleashed a 2-day assault on the breastworks surrounding the 270-year-old castle, but the peasant conscripts held, weathering his artillery barrages, battling against the studied swordsmanship of the samurai with their lug-mounted bayonets. Not to mention, they were cunning. Saigo's artillery would clear a breach in their earthwork forts and then send in a storming party of samurai, only to see them torn apart by landmines. By the second day, the imperial troops were mauled and low on ammunition. But they had significantly damaged Saigo's forces. They pulled back inside the castle, and Saigo dug in for a siege. For weeks, Saigo lost artillerymen to wall snipers. The February cold froze the ground. And inside the fortress, men were starving, running nearly dry of ammunition. But Saigo's army kept getting bigger. His nebulous mission attracting disaffected samurai from all over. 10,000 men became 20,000. Then the Imperial Army arrived to relieve the siege, and Saigo split his forces, leaving 5,000 men.
By delaying the Satsuma rebels until the government mounted a response, the guerrillas arguably won the war. Hey, they did the job. They did what they're supposed to.
And
Garrett's supposed to do.
15,000 to meet the Imperial
Not win,
Army.
but hold up
March 3rd,
long enough for help to arrive.
1877, the road to Kumamoto. In a pouring rain, an Imperial force of 90,000 attacks Saigo's samurai. Men slip on the grass, battling in the mud of trenches and positions. Saigo's rifles, primarily muzzle-loaders, are so waterlogged they won't fire, forcing the samurai to fight with blades. Every day the situation worsens. Skirmishes turn to full assaults. The dead stack up. In a 17-day battle, 4,000 men are killed on each side, nearly as many as the entire Boshin War. Then Saigo got word that the Imperial troops had landed in his home city of Kagoshima, which meant that even if he won both the battle...
I hate it when that happens. Oh my god, I hate it when that happens in Shogun 2. You're like, your main army is like fighting somewhere else. Whoop! Here's an entire army, a 20-stack army, that just take a boat, go around, and just took your capital.
And the siege. His army was now adrift. He sent a peace offer to the Imperial Army. It was rejected. So he abandoned the siege at Kumamoto, the castle which had held out 52 days, and retreated. Saigo and his forces essentially went on the run. He'd drop off a few units to slow down pursuers with guerrilla tactics before drawing up for another clash. And at times, he escaped encirclement with such cunning that dissident press began to treat him as a Robin Hood-like hero. An old samurai standing up for Japanese values against reform and modernization. But there was no strategy, no objective. This was now theater, a way to prove a point about his own samurai virtue. He was forced to abandon his firearms and artillery and slipped home to stage his last stand in Kagoshima. Now here he was, holding a mountain with 500 men, with an army of 30,000 soldiers below in prepared fortifications. He refused their offer for him to surrender. At 4 a.m., his samurai charged the Imperial Army with swords, rushing down the mountainside into the blast of cannons and crack of rifles. They hit the Imperial line, and for a moment, katanas flashed, their swordsmanship driving the Imperials back. But Saigo had been hit, the bullet shattering his pelvis. His second in command cut off his head, covering up the fact that Saigo was too horrifically wounded to commit seppuku. Then he turned, and with the last 40 men, charged into the guns once more. It was the end of an era. Saigo Takamori, one of the 3 great nobles, had martyred himself against the government he'd helped create.
Went out with a
and
bang.
ironically, the other 2 great nobles would fall with him. Kaido had died of an illness months before, and 8 months after Saigo's death, ex-samurai assassinated Akubo not far from where Ii Naosuke had died. The samurai were well and truly gone. But their legend endured. Barely a decade later, the emperor would pardon Saigo, holding him up as an example of Bushido and commitment to Japanese values. Such heroes were precious to what increasingly came to replace the old samurai order, nationalism. Soldiers were encouraged to see themselves as samurai, as Japan launched an era of aggressive imperialism alongside the most rapid industrialization campaign in history. And some samurai, unlike Saigo, even navigated that change. Because remember a few episodes ago when we talked about the bombardment at Kagoshima? When samurai with black powder cannons walked into the surf, waving their katanas at the British ship? Well, you might know this one right here. That's Togo Heihachiro. And while only 13 then, in 1905, he would lead a modernized Japanese fleet to crush the Russians at the Battle of Tsushima, showing that while the samurai were gone, their spirit never died.
In fact, we here at Extra History are attempting to honor that very spirit ourselves with our 2026 calendar September piece titled The Last Samurai from EH artist David Hueso, a historical homage to Utagawa Kuniyoshi's 1840s piece Tagayashi the Witch and the Skeleton Spectre, except in ours, now the Spectre is the industrialized military force that the samurai faced during the Satsuma Rebellion. And you can snag this gorgeous piece along with 11 other historical reimaginings right now on Kickstarter. That is right, last year's History Happens Everyday calendar was so successful, we're doing it again. All the things you loved about our 2025 calendar are back. And, you know, if we look at this list of Kickstarter backers here, on the back, a lot of uses of the word back here, I think there's a lot of stuff you loved. But now we are updating it with brand new jaw-dropping art, new daily historical happenings that regular calendars usually omit, and new scannable QR codes that link to extra history videos we've done about events that happened on those specific days. Plus, we've got cool new stuff in our deluxe tier for you to check out. I'm particularly partial to the coasters that I pushed for very hard, by the way. And
of course, there's coasters. There's always historians.
We heard you and got better rates on international
always
shipping.
Go for
Hell yeah.
And maybe shirts.
So what are you waiting for, friendos? A formal invitation? Okay, well, you know what? Please consider this your save the date and check out the new calendar tiers and exclusive perks for yourself at the link below or the QR code I hope is right next to where I'm pointing.
Go check them out. Go check them out.
The only way
Go check them out.
Guarantee that
does
you'll
not
get your
look good. Go check them out.
2026 is if you back this campaign. So to snag your 2026 historical calendar, click or scan here, and then you know what? I'm not even going to pitch the next video because this campaign is too cool. I want to make this calendar. Please go back it. You will not be disappointed. Once upon a time, Angela.
Yeah, and why would they thank for Patreon? I would like to thank all of you for being here. God damn, that was a good video, man. No, you know what? I'm gonna play Shogun 2 now. And if you want me to stream it, just tell me. But until then, go and support them. Go like, comment, subscribe in the original video. And if you're feeling generous, come back here and like, comment, subscribe to me. This has been Lewington, and thank you all for watching.